Okay, welcome everyone. As we learn the venerable learning of Chok Yisrael for Parshas Bhaloscha, Yom Shishi, day 6. So for this 6th day of Chok, we learn the very difficult Mesechtes Alois, which is from the most hardest parts of Shas, and we of the Yechidei Skula that learn the Arizal and the Chidaz discipline learn it, so we will learn a full parak of Alois, starting from the 10th parak, Mishnah Aleph. Aruba shehi b'soich habayis. If there's an open skylight in a house, that means you have a roof and there's a square opening in the roof, at least the size of a b'yesh b'peiseach tefach, and it's a opening of a square tefach. So tuma babayis, if there's a piece of corpse the size of a kazayas in the house, so under the full roof of the house, anything that's under the roof of the house is tamei, but keneged aruba, if there is something opposite the open skylight, tar, because that's not under the same roof as the mace. Tuma keneged aruba, if there's a piece of corpse opposite the skylight, so that it's not under the roof of the house, habai is tar, then the house is tar. Hatuma bein babayis bein keneged aruba, whether the corpse is under the roof or the corpse is under the open skylight, and then nosan esragloi milmola. Let's say Bruce takes his shoe, his foot, and covers the tefach of the open skylight, thereby sealing the roof. Then erev es hatuma, he joins all of the tuma, so that if the tuma is under the house, then everything inside the house is tamei, even that which is under the skylight, because he covered the skylight with his foot, sealing the house and making everything underneath it tamei. And not only that, but Bruce also becomes tamei because his foot is by the open skylight. Now, here's the next case. Mixas tuma babayis umiktsasa keneged aruba. Let's say you have a piece of corpse that's a kazayas. Half of the kazayas is under the roof, and half of the kazayas is under the aruba, is under the opening. So habai is tamei, the whole house is tamei, because it is a kazayas, and since part of that kazayas is under the roof of the house, the whole house is tamei. And not only that, ukeneged atuma tamei, anything that's opposite the piece that's sticking by the skylight, anything that's opposite that piece is also tamei. Now here we're going to change the dimensions. What we're going to do here now is ein ba'aruba poiseach tefach. If, let's say, the skylight is not a tefach square, so the first two dinim are the same. Tuma babayis, if there's tuma in the house, keneged aruba tar, then everything under the house, under the roof is tamei, and anything that's under the open skylight is tar, because it's not under the roof. Tuma keneged aruba, if the kazayas is completely opposite the open air space, even though it's not a poiseach tefach, the house is tar. Habai is tar, because it's not under the roof. Now, hatuma babayis. Let's say there's tuma in the house, and nosan es ragloi milmala. Here, there's tuma in the house, and Bruce puts his foot on top of this open skylight that's not a Pesach tefach. the din is tar. Bruce is going to be tar. Because since the opening is not a Pesach Tefach, it doesn't allow the tumah to exit. It's not big enough to allow the tumah to exit. And therefore, because of that, it can't pass through the hole, and Bruce remains tumah. But that's where the tumah was under the roof. What if the tumah is keneged aruba? This is interesting. Hatumah keneged aruba. The tumah, the corpse, is opposite, lies parallel to the opening. And the opening is less than a tefach, but Bruce puts his shoe right over that piece of corpse. So Nosen es ragloi milmalon, if he puts his foot above it, Rameya Matame, Rameya says, look, the tumah is boikas v'oilu lamala. The tumah goes straight up, and therefore, since Bruce's foot is there, Bruce becomes tumah. The Chachamim say it depends who was there first, Bruce or the tumah. Very interesting. The Chachamim aimim im tumah kodma es ragloi, if the corpse was there, if the piece of corpse was opposite the opening, and then Bruce started to put his foot down on the opening, as soon as his foot appears there, even before it sits down on the opening, the tumah already hits his shoe, and therefore he's tumah. But im ragloi kodma es hatumah, but if his foot came there before the piece, so then when his foot came there, it sealed up the roof. And then tar. Then he's tar because the Chacham hold the tumah can't pass through to get to his shoe. Reb Shimon says an interesting thing. Building on what the Chachamim say, and because Marshall wants to get in the act over here. Bruce comes there by the opening and puts down his shoe, sealing it. Then Marshall puts his shoe on top of Bruce's shoe. And then Bruce pulls his foot away. Marshall is also tar. Because since it was sealed before the tumah got there, Marshall just continues to seal. And that's what the Gemara says now. Let's see it inside. Reb Shimon that's what the Mishnah says. Reb Shimon mishtei raglayim, 2 feet, zu al gav zu, one on top of another. Shekodmu es hatumah. Bruce got there before the tumah, sealing up the roof. Then Moshach arishin es raglai. Then Bruce pulls out his foot. V'nimtza raglai shel sheni sham. But Marshall's shoe is there instead. Marshall is also tar. Since Bruce was there before the piece of the corpse, so he sealed the roof that it can't get through. And now when he pulls his foot away, Marshall's foot is still there, so it's considered still sealed, and therefore it's not tummy. Now, here we have an interesting situation. Remember, we're talking about where the opening is smaller than a tefach. It's not a Pesach tefach. Miktsas tuma babayis or miktsasa keneged aruba. A half of the kazayas is under the roof, and a half of kazayas is under this small opening. So Abaye is tummy. The whole house is tummy because it is a full kazayas and it's mitzdarif, and therefore the corpse is under part of the roof. The whole house is tummy. Or keneged atuma tummy, and anything that's in the airspace opposite the half of kazayas that's under the opening is also tummy. Divrei Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, I agree with you that Abaye is tummy, that anything under the roof is tummy, because since it's a total corpse of a kazayas and part of it is under the roof, so anything under the roof is tummy. But keneged atuma tar, but anything that's outside of the house, no, it's outside of the opening, above the opening, which is less than a tefach, even though it's directly above that half a kazayas of corpse, is tar. Because a half a kazayas does not extend up when the opening is less than a tefach. Reb Yosi makes a chilek. Reb Yosi im yesh betuma kedei shetecholek utetame esabayis utetame keneged atoma atome. If there's an amount of 2 kazaysim, so you have enough that there's a kazayis under the roof to be metame the house, and there's a kazayis under the small opening, then that's enough that to say that anything that's directly over it, the tumah is b'kas v'oila l'mala, it goes up and it's tumah. The imla, but if not, if you don't have a shear of a kazayis under the opening, habayis tumah, the house is tumah, because as long as you have a total of kazayis and part of it is under the house is tumah. But keneged atuma tar, but that which is opposite the tumah, above the skylight, which is less than a pesach tefach, is tar. Now the next case is the same thing, except there's 2 stories, and this is a skylight that they drilled through 2 stories. So you have an opening in the roof of the first story, and directly above it there's an opening in the roof of the second story. So you have 2 skylights, so that the first story and the second story could enjoy the sunlight. And so you have a skylight in the first story and a skylight in the second story, one directly above the other. I made a bracha already. Aruba is zu al gavzu, a skylight, one directly above the next. V'yesh ben pesach tefach, and they both have an opening of a tefach. And now this is going to be the same halacha that we had in Mishnah Aleph. Tumah b'bayis, if you have a corpse under the roof, keneged aruba star, opposite the skylight is star, because it's not under the roof. Tumah keneged arubas, if you have a corpse under the skylight, habayis star, since it's not under the roof of the house, so the house is star. Hatuma bein babayis bein keneged arubas. Whether the tumah is under the house or it's under the opening, nosan davar shuhu mikabel tumah. If you put covering the skylight something that's mikabel tumah, like a metal keli, so you're covering it with something that's mikabel tumah. Now the din is that something that's mikabel tumah makes a roof, but it's not chaytzeitz b'fnei tumah. That means anything that underneath it is tamei, but it doesn't block the tumah from rising. So if you cover it, nasan davashu mikabel tumah, bein milmalan, either whether you cover the upper skylight, bein milmatan, or you cover the lower skylight, hakol tamei, everything's tamei. Why? Because if, let's say, you cover the lower skylight, so you cover the lower skylight with the keli, everything underneath in the first floor is tamei, because it's an oil. It seals it, so everything underneath is tamei. However, since it's mekabel tumah, it's not chaytetz b'fnei tumah, so therefore the tumah rises above it as well. And when the tumah rises above it, we say good asik mechitzasa. We lift the cover to be on the top of the second skylight. That's the halach l'meishim. We see now have good asik mechitzasa. We could pick it up, and since the tumah goes through it, we could pick it up and cover the second skylight, and therefore everything under the roof of the second floor is also tamei. So hakol tamei. However, v'davar she'eina mekabel tumah, if you cover it with a sheet of metal that's not a keli, and it's not mekabel tumah, so then it just seals up the first floor, then mimenu lamatan, from it and underneath it is tamei. But mimenu lamalan, from it and above it is star. So therefore, in the event that you put the tumah under this sheet of metal, so the first floor is going to be tamei, but the second floor is not going to be tamei, because it's since it's a keli, it's chaytzitz b'fnei tumah. It's not a keli; it blocks the tumah from rising above it. Now Mishnah Hay tells us changing the configuration over here, making the opening not a Pesach Tefach. Again, there's two skylights, one on top of another, but it doesn't have a square Tefach. Ein ba'aruba is Pesach Tefach. If the skylights don't have an opening of a Tefach, then Tumah Babayis, if there's Tumah in the house, this is all the same. If there's Tumah in the house is Tumah, but underneath the skylights is not. Keneged Aruba star. Tumah Keneged Arubas, if it's Tumah opposite the skylight, Habayis tar, the house is tar because it's not under the roof. HaTumah Babayis, if you had Tumah in the house, and Nosan Bein Dover Shu Mekabel Tumah, Bein Dover She'ena Mekabel Tumah, and you put on the skylight, whether you put on it something that's Mekabel Tumah or something that's not Mekabel Tumah, Bein Milmalon, Bein Milmatan, whether you put it on the first story or on the second story, Ein Tomei Ela Tachton. The only room that's going to be Tomei is the bottom floor, because remember, the Tumah can't extend past an opening that's a Pesach Tefach. So if the Tumah is not opposite the opening, but the Tumah is under the roof of the first floor, it makes no difference where you put an item, and the truth of the matter is, even if you wouldn't have put an item, the Tumah can't pass through to the second floor because the Tumah doesn't pass through an opening that's less than a Pesach Tefach. Ha-Tumah Keneged Arubais, but if the Tumah is opposite the opening, then Nosan Dover Shu Mikabel Tumah, if you put covering the opening, remember now it's directly underneath the opening. So directly underneath the opening, the Tumah is Bakas. So if you put on the opening something that's Mekabel Tumah, now remember something that's Mekabel Tumah is a seal, but also the Tumah passes through it. It can't be Chaitzis B'fnei HaTumah. So Bein Milmalon, Bein Milmatan, whether you put it, the covering of a Keli on the upper aruba, or you put it on the lower aruba, lower opening, Hakol Tumah, because as we said, the Tumah passes through. So if you put it, let's say, since it's directly under the opening, so it doesn't make sense, doesn't make a difference that it's not a Pesach Tefach, the Tumah goes up. And since the covering is Mekabel Tumah, it pierces through the covering, and therefore everything on the bottom is Tameh because it acts as a seal to seal the roof. Everything on the bottom is Tameh. And then we say Good Asik Mechitzasa, bringing it up, and everything then under the second floor is also Tameh. Hakol Tameh. However, V'davar she'eina Mekabel Tumah, but if you cover it with something that's not Mekabel Tumah, a regular sheet of metal, let's say, that's not Mekabel Tumah, Bein Milmalon, Bein Milmatan, whether above or below, Ein Tomei Ela Tachton. Only the bottom one is Tomei, because if it's not Mekabel Tumah, it's Chaitzis B'fnei HaTumah, and here we say good Achis Mechitzah, so we bring it down, even if it's on the top, we bring it down to the bottom one, and it seals the bottom floor, and only the bottom floor is Tameh. Now, Aruba Shehi B'Seich HaBayis, this is a new case. We're back to only a one-story house now, a one floor, and here we have the skylight in the house, and opposite the skylight, on the floor, you have a pot. Ukedeira nisuna tachtel. You have a pot underneath it. Shim tala, if you would levitate this pot, it would be able to go through the skylight. Ein sifsoiseha, the edges of the pot would not be noigis baruba, would not touch the edges of the skylight. In other words, the pot would be able to fit right through the skylight. This pot is off the ground less than a tefach, so that the bottom of the pot is not a roof. Then tumah tachtel, if there's tumah underneath it, beseicha, or inside it, oy al gaba, or above it, directly opposite the skylight. Tuma b'kas v'oila b'kas v'yeredis. The tuma goes upward and downward. Now, this is a chiddush that even though a klei cheres, an earthenware keli, is usually not tomei from the outside, only from the inside, but here, if the tumah is underneath it, and it's corpse contamination, and it's tumah retzutza, meaning that there isn't a tefach between the corpse and the bottom of this earthenware, it pierces the earthenware. And it goes up and it goes down. And once it pierces the earthenware and it goes into the earthenware, anything inside the earthenware becomes tameh. Now, hoisa gevaya min haaretz tefach, if the keli was off the ground at tefach, then it's not tumah retzutza anymore. Then it's a roof. Then tumah tachtel, then if there's tumah underneath it, oy babayis, or in the house, since it's a tefach above the ground, the bottom of this pot, it serves as an oil. And therefore it's an oil, and the roof of the house is an oil, so therefore the tumah will spread from underneath the pot to the room to the side, or the tumah in the house will spread to underneath the pot. So the din is tumah tachtel oy babayis, or in the house tachtel v'abayis tamei. Underneath it and the house is tamei, but since it's a roof, toicha inside the klei cheretz v'gaba, and directly on top of it is tar. However, if it's a tefach above the ground and the tumah is b'soicha oy al gaba, the corpse is directly inside the klei cheretz or on top of it. So here we say, this is an interesting din. Here we say that if the tumah is inside it, so it all becomes tameh, and if it all becomes tameh, then it's not choitzis b'fnei atumah, and the tumah goes underneath it as well. And then, since it's a tefach above the ground, it spreads into the house. Then akol tameh. Then everything is tameh. The final mishnah that we learn over here is if you have a keli, hoisenisuna b'tzadha is kaifa. Here you have the pot, which is on the side of the threshold of the house. Most of it is outside, but one tefach is under the lintel of the house. She'im talahi, if you would levitate the pot, nogas b'mashkoif peiseach tefach, it will touch the lintel of the house, the last tefach of the lintel of the house. So tumah tachtel, if there's tumah underneath it, b'saycha inside it, or al gaba, or above it, that tumah goes up and down, hits the lintel, so tumah b'kas v'oila b'kas v'yoredis. Now, but in this case, it doesn't go into the house. If it was in the inner tefach of the house, then the whole house would become tameh. But here, since it's the outside tefach of the house, it only directly above it becomes tameh. But hoisa gevaya min haaretz tefach, if it was off the ground a tefach, so then it serves as an oil, and then it will, as serving as an oil, it will combine with the lintel and the roof of the house. Then tumah tachtel oy babayis, if there's tumah underneath it or in the house, so whatever's underneath it and the entire house, tachtel v'abayis tameh, toicha v'gaba, but inside it, since it's a roof, so it's chaitzis from it going into it, and directly above it is tar. But if it's a tefach above the house, b'soicha al gaba, if there's tumah inside it or on top of it, so there again we say that it becomes tamei, and once it becomes tamei, it's not chaytzitz from the tumah going underneath it, and the tumah going underneath it, it's an oil, then it goes into the house, hakol tamei. Shim tala, if however, it was not under the lintel. Shim tala, if it was so outside of the house that if you would levitate it, it won't hit the lintel of Pesach Tefach, or it's so much outside that it would only become flush with the outside of the lintel. It would only become flush with the outside of the lintel and not meet the lintel at all. So then tumah tachtev, this tumah underneath it, it doesn't connect with the roof of the house. Ain't tamei ela tachtev, then it's only tamei what's directly underneath the pot, and it doesn't get into the house because then it doesn't connect with the roof of the house to bring the tumah into the house. Now we learn the Gemara in Nida Daf Chafala from the days. By Minei Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah inquires of Rabbi Zera. Haroya dam bashveiferes ma'u. If a woman inserts a tube into her vaginal canal, and the blood comes through the tube, not through the vaginal canal, but through the tube from the uterus, what's the din? Bibisara al merachmana, it has to come out in the flesh, on her flesh, v'loi bashveiferes, not through a tube. It tells us that she's tamei once it exits the uterus, even if it's in the vaginal canal, before it comes outside. That's what we learn out from Bibisara. Amalei, so he says to him, Bibisara Amarachmana, in the flesh, but not if it comes out through a tube. If it's coming to tell us the halacha, that she's tummy even when it's in the vaginal canal before it exits her body. Imke name a krababasa. It would not have to say bibisara with the hay. My bibisara shmami no tarte. That also, if it comes out, it has to come out directly from her body and not through a tube. Says the Gemara, is that true? Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of the famous Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Hamapeles chaticha, if a woman miscarries a piece of meat, kaira, you tear it open. Im yesh dam agur tmeya. If there's blood inside it, then she's tamei. Vim lav, but if not, tahira. So you see that if the blood comes out, but it only comes out encased in a chaticha, you see she's tamei. So even if it doesn't come out straight from her flesh. So the Gemara says, Hachi ashka. What's the comparison? It does happen that a woman sees blood in a piece of flesh. But here, that's not a natural thing. That's a foreign tube. And therefore, if she sees blood through a foreign tube, she is tar. Now we learn a Zayar in Vayakel. Pasuk Reb Yitzchak Abasrei, Reb Yitzchak said after him, Va'amar Vayakel Moshe is kol adas b'nei Yisrael. Moshe gathered the assemblage of b'nei Yisrael. Amai konishlan, why did he gather them? Begim lemimtzer loin Shabbos kilemekadmin, to give them Shabbos exclusively to them, like he did initially. Because the Chazayah is going to teach us initially when Moshe Rabbeinu gave them Shabbos, he did not give it to the Erev Rav. Initially, before the Bnei Yisrael worshipped the Egel, he gave us the Shabbos, and this is something that the Erev Rav, the admixture of Egyptians that gathered with Klal Yisrael and left Mitzrayim, they did not keep Shabbos. Because Kevin the Shamu Beini Uvein Bnei Yisrael, since it said Beini Uvein Bnei Yisrael, between me and the Bnei Yisrael, Amru, they said, Vanan Milada Isman Mana Minan. This mitzvah was withheld from us. It's only Beini Uvein Bnei Yisrael, and they didn't keep the Shabbos. And therefore, since they didn't keep the Shabbos, they were vulnerable to the Yetzirah of the Egel. Miyad Vayikolu Om Al Aaron, the nation gathered with Aaron and said, let us build us an egel, and that caused many, and many Jews, unfortunately, followed in their wake. So we see that Shabbos strengthens a person against the Yetzer Hara. That's why it says that Mila is on the 8th day, to always ensure that the child should see a Shabbos before the Mila. Mila strengthens a person for mitzvahs. Labasar demisu inun demisu, after the generation that was supposed to die died, Konish Moshe of Bnei Yisrael, Bilachaydayu, again Moshe Rabbeinu gathered just the Bnei Yisrael, the Yovlon Shabbos Kim Milakadmin, and he gave them exclusively the Shabbos like before. Hadod Siv Sheishis Yomim Teosem Malacha. 6 days you should do work. Vashvi Hashem Alikecha. And now the Zohar teases us that there's secrets that only the Hakimim Elohim, only very, very elevated sages know. You shouldn't kindle a fire in all your habitats on the Shabbos day. In this pasuk is embedded a secret of secrets. To only those that know the upper wisdom. Raza Shabbos or K'mur Chavrai. The secret of Shabbos was explained by the sages. Aval Raza Da, but the secret of Leisavaro Eish B'chol Moishvei Seichem Ismasar L'Chakimei El Yainim was only given to the really elite sages. Da Shabbos Raza Ilo, because Shabbos is a very celestial, a very great secret. Now we know one secret that we know from Leisavaro Eish B'chol Moishvei Seichem B'Yom HaShabbos is the secret that we should be very careful not to have anger on the Shabbos day. And the Leisavaro Eish B'chol Moishvei Seichem means that the kindle of anger should be very protected on the Shabbos day especially. And now Rabbeinu Yaina tells us, Kasher Yekabel Ha'odam Es Musar Hashem, when a person accepts the rebuke of Hashem, V'yetiv Drochav Umalolav, and he perfects his ways and deeds, it's worthy for him to be happy with the suffering that he was given, because it helped him with great help. It aided him with great help. And he should give thanks to Hashem like on other prosperity. In other words, if rebuke and suffering caused him to mend his ways, he should rejoice over it. Shenemar Kais Yeshua says of Hashem Hashem Ekra, a cup of salvation I lift and I call out to Hashem when a person has happiness. Distress and grief I found of Hashem Hashem Ekra. The same thanks even for distress when it causes a person to better his ways. One rabbi was saying, and our rabbi is a blessed memory, said in Sifrei, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Eimer calls mansha adam shari b'shalva. When a person has serenity, aim iskapeloi me'avonos of klum. It doesn't atone for any of his sins. V'al yedei yisurin, when suffering comes, he becomes more accepted by Hashem. Sheneba asher yav Hashem yoichiach, like the one that Hashem loves, he chastises. U'cha'ov es ben yirtza, and like a father accepts his son. Pirish, ka'ov es ben, like a father to his son. Kain yirtza Hashem es asher yoichiach v'kibel musarei. So Hashem accepts one who he rebukes and who accepts the rebuke. Like a father who accepts his son lovingly after he accepts the rebuke and gets the message. We should also understand that a father will rebuke a child if he thinks it's going to help. the father will rebuke his son, that it will accept it. And that he favors this son and thinks that there's hope for him. He doesn't rebuke a child that he gave up on, and he knows that the rebuke is not going to help. It says about the people that don't recognize the benefit of rebuke and its help. I wanted to redeem them, but they spoke about me falsehood, saying that the message is not for me. I punished, I wanted to strengthen their arms, but they thought about it that it was bad. I wanted to help Ephraim to walk. I wanted to take him upon my arms, but he doesn't recognize that I healed him. He doesn't recognize that it's from me. And there is a person who trusts Hashem, to hope that suffering will be lifted, that the darkness will lead to greater light when a person mends their ways. Like it says in Micha, al tismechi oyafti li, my enemy should not rejoice over me. Ki nafalti, because although I fall, kamti, I will arise. Ki eishech b'choshech, although I'm living in darkness now, Hashem orli, Hashem will provide light for me when I get the message of the chastisements. And finally, we learn the halacha in Hilchos Shabbos from the Rambam, that if a bunch of people together do a malacha, all of them are chayiv. So if all of them at the same time do an act of cooking, one brings the fire, one brings the wood, one brings the pot, one brings the water, and one brings the meat, and one brings the spice, and one comes and mixes it, and they did it all at the same time. They're all chayav for cooking. Whoever does part of the malacha of bishul, he's doing cooking. But if they do it one after another, if one puts the pot there, that's nothing. One fills it up with water. One puts in the meat. And then somebody puts in the spices. Even if somebody brings a fire, but it would go out right away. A person puts there the wood, and now it makes a fire, and another person comes and mixes it. It's only the last two, the one that put the wood, so it could be a lasting fire, and the one that mixes it, which is also a ma'aseh bishul, they are chayiv. If you put meat on coals, if there's roasted in the coal, the amount of a dried fig gets roasted, even if it's in 2 or 3 different places. In other words, the amount of a dried fig you have to combine 2 or 3 different places. Chayiv is chayiv for cooking on Shabbos. If even the size of a dried fig was not roasted, but the whole piece of meat is cooked up to half of its cooking, that's called machal ben drusai, the machal of the bandit. The Rambam holds this is when it's 50% cooked, and a bandit will eat it 50% cooked, chayiv. But that's only if it's 50% cooked throughout. If it's 50% cooked on one side, in this bashal, chatzi bishul mitzad echad, if it's 50% cooked on one side, potter achiyafach, but you have to turn it over, v'yis bashal chatzi bishul b'shnei tzadim. It has to be 50% cooked on both sides. Now, the final halach is, shochach v'hidbik pas b'taner b'Shabbos. If you forgot it was Shabbos, and you put bread in the oven. Now, they used to put bread against the wall of the oven. Now, if you leave it there, then it's going to bake, and then you're going to be over an Issa D'Oraisa. Now, removing it from the wall of the oven is an Issa D'Rabbanan. It's called Raida Pas. So the Rambam says, you're allowed to remove it from the wall of the oven and do the Issa D'Rabbanan, before it bakes, and you come to the Issa D'Oraisa of breaking bread on Shabbos. Rabbi Say, we'll stop over here. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful day.